My name is Ava, I am 38 years old and right at my father's funeral, while my heart was still bleeding from the loss. My sister Madison walked in as if it were a fashion runway. She had her arm through her new husband's, the man who should have been my husband 7 years earlier. Cole, my former fiancé, a tech millionaire who betrayed me to chase after my own sister. Madison came close, her eyes sparkling with diamonds, a smug curve on her lips. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, "What do you have besides that funeral dress?" "I have a husband, a mansion, and a business." I looked her straight in the eyes, not angry, not aching the way I used to. I only smiled and gently asked, "Have you met my husband yet?" When I turned and called Ethan's name, the whole hall went silent as though someone had squeezed the air out of it. Because the man who stepped forward, none other, was Cole's #1 rival in the investment world, the person who had once cost him millions in a disastrous deal. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by your own blood, and then met them again at the most sacred moment of your life? If you have felt that, please share in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from. Because right after this, I will tell you what really happened on the day everything in my life fell apart. I still remember that fateful night clearly, the night I first met Cole at a charity gala in Manhattan. I was 31 years old then, serving as marketing director at a leading media company, living in a luxury apartment on the 25th floor of the Upper East Side. I thought my life was fine, full, lacking for nothing. Then Cole appeared and my world seemed to be pulled into a dazzling light I had never stepped into before. He arrived with a well-known investor I recognized from the press. People immediately turned toward him, as if he were emitting a strange light that changed the color of the room. Tall, composed, measured in speech, his gaze sharp but not cold, Cole Anderson didn't have to force himself to be the center. He already was the attraction. I hadn't planned to stay long that night. Work had exhausted me all week, but Allison, a colleague and close friend, insisted I come. When she introduced me to Cole, I only gave a thin smile, thinking I'd exchange a few polite phrases and slip out early. Cole wouldn't let me. He knew how to ask the right question at the right time, listening intently as if I were the only person left in that crowded room. For the first time in years, I didn't have to perform while talking to a man. 2 weeks later, a large bouquet arrived at my office with a simple card. "If you agree to dinner with me, I promise I'll let you pick the dessert." I laughed amid the flood of emails. I said yes. From that evening on, I slid into a journey I thought at the time was the most beautiful dream of my life. We dated quietly those first weeks. Cole preferred small restaurants without press, always ensuring everything was perfect. I remember once he took me for a walk in the snow in Brooklyn, his hands deep in his coat pockets while I shivered despite wearing 2 layers of knit. "Why don't we just sit inside like normal people?" I complained. He only smiled, pulling his scarf out of his coat to drape it around my neck. "Because out here you really breathe," he said, looking at me as if he saw something in me I had never noticed myself. My father, Richard, met Cole for the first time at a family Thanksgiving dinner that year. The moment he saw his future son-in-law, he straightened his collar and stood a little taller. After dinner he led me out to the balcony where snow had just started falling. "Ava," he said, voice low and steady. "I've met a lot of successful people, but not many keep their composure like that young man. If you truly love him, hold on to him." Those words felt like a sacred approval to me. My mother was gentler, though she couldn't hide her delight. She began making lists of potential wedding venues just weeks later, even though Cole and I hadn't discussed anything beyond weekend getaways. Madison, my sister, said little, only offering a casual remark at the end of the evening. "You really do have a good eye for people." Her smile then made my skin prickle, but I let it pass. Madison had always been that way, sharp, slightly tart, then smoothing over as if nothing happened. A few months later Cole proposed. The event took place on a rooftop in Midtown, the city lights below like a glittering painting. When he knelt and opened the ring box, I was stunned by a 6-carat pear-cut diamond. But it wasn't the sparkle that made me say yes. It was his eyes, steady, full of hope, and somehow very real. "I can't promise you a life without hardship," he said. "But I promise I won't let you be alone for even one night." I nodded without a word. After that, everything unfolded like a romantic film. The press covered it, friends sent gifts, my mother called asking about dress samples and flower types. Madison moved back nearby to help our mother prepare for the wedding, and seemed unusually cheerful. I thought maybe we were finally growing up, leaving behind the childish envy that had once divided us. I had no idea that all that glitter was only a thin veil covering a painful truth slowly emerging. Cole was still gentle and considerate, but he began missing family appointments. He blamed work last-minute meetings, and I, a woman used to demanding schedules, understood and sympathized. Madison, however, started showing up more often. She went to sample dresses in my place, chose cake flavors, even suggested trying on wedding dresses for fun during a behind-the-scenes shoot. "Maybe I'll meet someone like Cole," she said, and I laughed. I was too busy to notice what was slipping through my fingers. I believed Madison had matured. I believed Cole was sincere. But in those days I mistook peace for certainty. One person was quietly waiting for an opening, while another was slowly stepping back from the promise not to leave me alone for even one night. I began to feel something change even though no one mentioned it aloud. Cole remained courteous, yet the way he touched my back when passing through a crowd no longer felt natural. Morning messages dwindled, become brief calls with the excuse of urgent meetings. I understood Cole was ambitious and often consumed by big deals, but the distance between us didn't come from time alone. He was starting to withdraw from the shared space he had once been so eager to build. One weekend afternoon, after leaving a meeting with the wedding planner, my mother called to say Madison had gone to pick up cake samples for me, the cake Cole had been excited about a month earlier. I was surprised. "I thought he said he had to fly to San Diego today," I said. "No, she went with him. They thought they'd take the chance to switch the flavor since you didn't like that mint chocolate last time." I was silent for a few seconds. Mint chocolate was the flavor Cole and I had agreed felt too strong. I had never said I disliked it after the tasting. I even remember forcing down a slice because Cole loved it. How could Madison know that? When I called him that night, Cole dodged the question. "Oh, Madison just asked me to go with her so it wouldn't bother you. You were busy, so I thought." "You thought she understood my taste better than I do?" I asked, not angrily, just a cold edge in my voice. He hesitated, then chuckled softly. "It's just a wedding cake, don't make a big deal out of it." "The point isn't the cake, Cole." I hung up. Inside I felt strange and unmoored, as if I were looking at a familiar scene through thick glass. Sounds warped, movements slowed. I didn't tell anyone. I still went to the office, ran client meetings, had lunch with my mother about flower arrangements, smiled in photos when Madison took dress-fitting pictures for me. But inside, a widening emptiness spread, not from lack of love but from not being sure what role I held in my own life story. At rehearsal music meetings, Cole said he was tied up with work. At menu tastings, Madison attended with him. "I know her taste," she said during a Zoom with the caterer. I sat there like a guest invited to give the final yes on everything that belonged to my own wedding. Often I caught my mother watching me with concern, as if she sensed something amiss. She didn't speak and I wasn't certain enough to ask. Every morning I made coffee for the two of us out of habit. He no longer finished his cup. Some nights I'd come home to find it untouched. When I asked, he said, "My stomach's been a little off, probably stress." But he messaged more often, just not with me. One night, I woke at nearly 2 a.m. to the sound of his phone buzzing on the vanity. I hadn't intended to read it, but the screen lit up with the sender's name, Madison. I went into the kitchen and stood there, hands gripping the chair back as if to keep myself upright. The apartment felt oppressively quiet. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. By that point, I had a sense of where things were headed. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the meeting with the invitation designer. "You forgot. You said you'd go with me to pick the font and background color. It's scheduled for noon on Wednesday." Cole stirred his coffee and looked up. "I thought Madison said she'd go instead so you wouldn't be bothered?" I set down my spoon. "Why is she always the one who goes in my place, Cole?" He hesitated. "Because you're so busy. You delegated some things to her to ease the stress. Mom agreed too." I gave a dry laugh. "I didn't delegate anything to Madison. She took it on her own." He was silent for a beat, then murmured, "You're being overly sensitive." I said nothing. I got up, changed, and went to work as usual. But from that day on I started noticing every small detail. Phone calls with unclear recipients, the way Cole and Madison's eyes avoided mine when I walked in, how he always seemed to anticipate the things Madison happened to prepare for me. The worst part was I didn't feel angry so much as empty, as though every feeling had been drained out. One Friday afternoon, I got home earlier than usual because I canceled a client meeting, and the living room door was ajar. Madison was in the kitchen. I heard her bright laugh and Cole's soft reply. They weren't touching. There was nothing explicit. Yet the way she leaned on the counter, tilting her head while Cole stood very close, there was no mistaking the intimacy. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice curiously calm. Madison turned, unsurprised. "I popped by to show you some flower samples." "Why not send them to Mom?" "I figured you'd want to see them in person." Cole poured water and set a glass down as if to diffuse the moment. "It's just wedding flowers, Ava." I looked at both of them. My father's words echoed. Beware of people who try too hard to appear innocent. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the bed. On the shelf was a framed photo of Cole and me from a vacation in Colorado. I took the frame down and quietly tucked the picture into a drawer. Not out of anger, but because the man in the photograph no longer felt like the same person. The following week I moved through life as if my body were on autopilot. Work, meetings, meals, sleep, everything continued mechanically, a familiar dance my mind no longer joined. I stopped arguing with Cole. I stopped confronting Madison. Both behaved as if nothing were wrong, while I no longer had the faith to pretend I didn't see. One rainy Tuesday I arrived at the office early, hoping for a moment of calm before the storm. When I opened the glove compartment for files, I noticed something small wedged between the seat and door, an ivory handkerchief embroidered with a single letter. I picked it up. Satin soft, fine stitching. This wasn't a handkerchief for drying sweat or glass. It was the kind kept in a purse as a finishing touch, a subtle statement. Its scent wasn't mine, faint jasmine and cinnamon. I used to smell that perfume when hugging Madison good morning. She used a niche fragrance, rare enough to be unmistakable. I crouched down in the car, gripping the handkerchief. Part of me tried to reason it away. Maybe she'd forgotten it after asking Cole for a ride. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe. But every hypothesis only deepened my despair because they were built on fear, not trust. That night I said nothing. I wrapped the handkerchief in paper and placed it in a small drawer where I kept things that once meant something. Cole's first love letter to me, the bill from the dinner when we officially started dating, the card my parents sent when he proposed. The next day the creative director called. The department I ran was handling a major campaign for a high-end fashion brand, and he wanted me to personally deliver the final contract to the hotel hosting the brand's private preview. I agreed even though it wasn't on the schedule. The hotel was in Midtown, a tall glass building, grand without being loud. I arrived near 8 p.m., the signed documents in hand. At the desk, the receptionist recognized me. "Room 1803, ma'am. They're expecting you." I rode the elevator, my heart heavy. The door to the suite stood slightly ajar. I knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, then pushed the door open wider. Inside, a soft yellow bedside lamp glowed, the curtains drawn tight. The room smelled of a familiar perfume. Before I could speak, I heard a small laugh. Then I saw them. Cole was standing by the window and Madison was leaning against his back, her arms wrapped around his waist. She wore nothing but a beige silk nightgown, her hair loose, bare feet on the floor. Cole turned, our eyes met. He froze, his whole body stiff. Madison turned and caught my gaze. For a heartbeat her face went rigid, then quickly smoothed into a cool expression. She didn't hide it and she didn't try to explain. She only said softly, "Perhaps you've come at the wrong time." I didn't answer. I looked at Cole, the man who had once sworn he would never let me be alone for even one night. He said nothing. No apology. No hint of shame. I turned and walked out of that room, each step feeling like I was crossing over the ash of a dream I had believed in. The rain outside hadn't stopped. I stood under the hotel awning, letting the cold wind hit my face. The folder of documents I hadn't delivered was still in my hands. My phone rang. It was my mother. I didn't pick up. The next day I called off the engagement. I didn't see Cole, I said nothing to Madison. I sent a short email to my mother and father telling them the wedding would no longer take place. My mother called nonstop for 2 days. My father was completely silent until he knocked on my door on Saturday morning. He didn't ask anything. He just sat down in the armchair across from me and stared at me for a long time. "I suspected," he said in an even voice. "But I hoped I was wrong." I looked at him, my eyes dry. I used to think I was strong. It turns out I was only pretending. He said nothing more, stood up, came over and put his hand on my shoulder. You're not weak. But you don't have to keep pretending for anyone. They aren't worth your breaking. News of the cancelled wedding spread fast through the business community and the media. Rumors began to surface. Ava couldn't keep her fiancé. Cole found someone who understood him better. Some even said I was depressed, emotionally unstable, too controlling, forcing Cole to back away. I said nothing. I didn't attend a single event for 3 months. Madison posted travel photos with Cole in Hawaii, then Napa Valley, then Venice. Sparkling images, radiant smiles. No explanation. No apology. I became the topic at upscale dinner tables, an example of how a successful career does not guarantee personal happiness. I overheard colleagues whisper behind my back. Clients avoided mentioning Cole. But the most painful thing wasn't the silence from those who once admired me. It was the indifference of the very family who had pushed me into that pit. I had been the eldest daughter my father trusted. I had been Ava, the woman Cole Anderson pursued despite all standards. And then I became nothing more than the name attached to a cancelled wedding. I wondered, how many women have felt this? Not just losing a partner, but losing faith in the very way they once loved, trusted, and chose someone to build a life with? How many have had to stitch their hearts back together in silence, under looks that mixed pity and delight? I moved out of the apartment just 2 weeks after calling off the wedding. Everything was packed in a hurry, with no tears and not a single last glance at the balcony where Cole used to hold me from behind on autumn evenings. I left most of my things, taking only what I truly needed. Things can be replaced. Memories cannot. I wanted to leave that city as soon as possible. My mother called every night, her voice sometimes comforting, sometimes hesitant as if walking a tightrope. She urged me to talk to Madison, saying sisters shouldn't live in hatred forever. I listened in silence, letting her finish, then gently set the phone down. Every time I heard my mother's voice, it felt like someone trying to convince me that the pain I had gone through was a small family hiccup that could be smoothed over with a few hugs and one dinner. My father was different. From the moment he learned what had happened, he didn't speak. But in his eyes when I told him, I saw unhidden pain. There is nothing more to say to her, he said briefly. Madison called several times, but I didn't pick up. She emailed, texted, even wrote a long handwritten letter to my parents' home address. I didn't read it. I left it to my father to decide what to do. He burned it in the backyard. I left my job after nearly 10 years with the company. Not because they fired me, nor because I couldn't do the work. I just couldn't sit in a conference room and not think about the campaign presentations where Cole had shown up as a sponsor, or the times Madison had swung by to borrow a dress for an event, smiling brightly and blowing air kisses to everyone. Faces I once knew had become suffocating. Polite questions like, "Are you okay?" made me feel like a piece of tabloid news, mentioned more for scandal than for achievements. I flew to Chicago on a cold March afternoon. The city wasn't unfamiliar, but it wasn't home either. I'd been there a few times for work, enough to remember the route from the airport to downtown, but no deep ties. That made it the perfect place to disappear and start over. I rented a small studio in West Loop. No walnut floors, no floor-to-ceiling windows, no doorman in a suit. Just an old building, narrow hallways, thin walls, the real sounds of life bleeding through at night. Yet I felt relieved. I slept more, ate less, and only spoke to the cashier at the corner market. Each morning I made coffee, sat by the window and watched people hurry to work, feeling like I was standing outside a world I used to fight to be part of. For the first 3 months in Chicago I didn't work. I had enough savings to last a few years if needed. I spent my time writing in a journal, reading old books, and walking through unfamiliar neighborhoods. There were days I didn't speak a single word. At night I lay awake for hours, rewinding images, phrases, and touches from Cole. I didn't remember them out of love but out of anger. I was angry with myself for overlooking so many signs because I feared losing the person I loved. Near the end of spring, I received an email from an old friend in advertising inviting me to an internal networking event for startup investors and marketing professionals. I hesitated. I didn't want to go back. In the end I went not for opportunity but to test the feeling of standing in a crowd without being anyone. The event took place in an art space converted from an old warehouse. I stood in a corner with a glass of white wine, hearing fragments of conversations about technology, digital transformation, and user data. I didn't participate. I didn't want to present anything about my past. He came up from my right, wearing a gray shirt, no tie, holding a glass of water. He wasn't flashy, but there was something in his eyes that made me stop when I was turning away. "Are you Ava Wilson?" His voice was low, not forceful. I turned surprised. "Do I know you?" "No. But I heard you speak at a Boston media conference 3 years ago. The campaign for Sunterra watches. I still remember how you used emotion maps to analyze consumer behavior. Very impressive." I couldn't hide a small smile. It had been a long time since anyone mentioned my work without attaching it to my personal failure. "My name is Ethan Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I invested in that project last year. Sorry I didn't meet you sooner." We talked casually. No propositions, no suggestive looks. He didn't ask what I was doing in Chicago, and he didn't bring up anything beyond work and books. I felt comfortable because I wasn't being examined. At the end of the evening, he simply asked to send me a project brief for feedback. No pressure, no expectations. The next day, I received an email from him with the promised material, no personal lines attached. I opened the presentation, read every slide, and sent back my notes. Not long after, he invited me for coffee. I went without makeup, without a dress, without expectations. Just two adults tired of empty pursuits, finding each other in a quiet stretch of life. Ethan didn't ask about Cole. I didn't tell him. He spoke about failed deals and a quiet divorce that left its own scars. I listened as if seeing another version of myself. From then on, somehow we began meeting more often. Not dating in the traditional sense, not calling each other pet names. Just two recovering souls sharing a corner table, a calm afternoon, a good book, a quiet dinner that didn't have to fill the silence with chatter. Ethan never tried to fix me. He simply showed up, present enough and no more. That steadiness took the urgency out of my need to rush into anything to fill the void. I can't say exactly when I started missing Ethan after those meetups. It wasn't a desperate kind of longing, nor a feverish passion typical of hasty romances. It was a small, hollow feeling when I returned to my quiet apartment and the kitchen lights still waited each night without anyone asking, "Are you tired today?" Ethan never pressured me to open up, and he never seemed flustered by long silences. Our meetings sometimes centered on work, but gradually we moved beyond numbers and charts. I told him about my father, about mornings he brewed coffee so strong my mother would frown. Ethan shared a story about a small plot of land he'd bought in the suburbs for his ex-wife before the marriage fell apart. His tone carried no bitterness. He spoke calmly, as if every scar needed to be faced and then gently set right. We collaborated on a few small projects. He introduced me to startups he mentored and I helped them refine branding and messaging. Ethan never stole my voice in meetings, never corrected me publicly. When I presented, he would watch with a steady look, as if the things I said deserved to be heard to the end. Some evenings after work we'd detour to a tiny bar tucked in an alley. Ethan ordered whiskey, I had hot tea. He listened to me complain about last-minute client reversals. I listened to him describe the pressure of picking the right startup among a sea of pitches. Neither of us felt the need to perform strength. Between us, silence wasn't awkward, it was space for both to breathe. When Ethan first took my hand, I didn't pull away. But my heart recoiled, the reflex of an old wound not yet healed. He noticed. He didn't ask, didn't pull away, only squeezed my hand gently and kept walking, as if we were crossing a narrow bridge where every step had to be measured with sincerity. One June evening on his rooftop, lavender pots scenting the air and the smell of grilled food lingering from dinner, Ethan suddenly asked, "If one day I propose, would you run?" I looked at him, unsure what to say. My heart raced, not with excitement but with a rising fear. I no longer trusted long promises. I had once stood smiling at an engagement party with a broken heart. I didn't want to repeat that. "I'm not afraid of marriage," I said softly. "I'm afraid of trusting the wrong person again." Ethan nodded as if he'd heard that answer many times before. He didn't offer a reassuring joke or rush to tell me I could trust him. He simply looked at me with tenderness and said, "I don't need a promise today. Just know that if you're ever ready, I'll be here." After that night I had trouble sleeping. Not out of panic, but because I found myself genuinely wanting to give myself a chance. I didn't dream of gowns or roses. I wanted to open up again slowly. That autumn I agreed to visit family after nearly 2 years away. Madison wasn't there. My father had grown noticeably older, his hair nearly white, but his eyes were still sharp. He looked at Ethan for a long moment and said plainly, "You are different from the man before." "No need to ask, I can see it." My mother couldn't hold back her tears and hugged me tightly, whispering how happy she was to see me, at peace. That Christmas, Ethan took me to a small suburban church where a choir sang old carols. He didn't kneel or open a ring box. He placed an envelope in my hand, a short handwritten note inside. "If you agree to walk beside me for the rest of our lives, place your hand in mine when the next song plays." I read it and couldn't hold back tears. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I had never been given such a gentle, complete choice. When the next song began, I reached out. He took my hand, not gripping, only enough so I felt held. We married the following spring in a small ceremony with only my parents, a few close friends, and a backyard strewn with flower petals. No designer gown, no tiered cake, no press. I wore a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of lavender and jasmine. Ethan wore the gray suit from our first meeting. My father was the one who walked me down the aisle, his eyes following every step I took, saying nothing, yet I felt a trust that needed no words. When I looked into Ethan's eyes as we read our vows, I no longer felt fear or doubt. I saw a man who hadn't come to change my life but to walk alongside me, even on a road marked by old scars. We don't call each other destiny. We call each other companions. And perhaps, of all the things I once longed for, that is the most precious. My father died on a September morning, sudden as a cold early gust. My mother called while I was getting ready for a meeting, her voice almost choked between quick breaths. "He collapsed in the garden. The doctor says his heart couldn't take it." I stood frozen in the office, the surrounding noise shrinking away like a distorted dream. Images of my father flashed through my head: the coffee he made every morning, the gray sweater he always wore when the wind turned sharp. He was a man of few words, but every one of his words had been a steady pillar in my life. And now it all collapsed into silence. Ethan canceled everything and booked the earliest flight to get us home to Boston. I sat by the airplane window, my head against the glass, my eyes dry though my chest ached. He didn't ask many questions, he just held my hand for the whole flight. His hand was always warm and steady like an awning in the storm. When we arrived at the house, Mother was still sitting in the wooden chair by the window, her eyes hollowed but her gaze clear. She squeezed my hand without crying. "Your father would like that you came back like this," she said softly, looking at Ethan with warmth. "Beside the person you chose for yourself." We spent 3 days preparing for the funeral. Mother and I selected the casket, the fresh flowers, the music, all the things I had never imagined having to arrange so soon. Each night I sat with my father's old photo albums, flipping through them and telling Ethan stories from my childhood. How my father taught me to whittle wood, the winter camping trip when both of us caught colds but laughed so hard at the pot of soup that spilled into the snow. On the morning of the funeral, Boston was overcast and a light drizzle hung like a thin veil. I wore a long black dress and the wool cloak my mother had given me. Ethan stood by my side, polite and composed as always. We arrived at the funeral parlor earlier than scheduled. Mother was there, speaking with a few of my father's old friends, people who had accompanied him through his later years, their faces tender with grief. I was helping a funeral staff member arrange fresh flowers when a murmur came from the doorway. I turned. Madison walked in, Cole's arm tightly around hers, striding through the room as if entering a brand launch. She wore black, of course, but the kind chosen to flatter rather than for solemnity. On her left hand was a diamond ring almost as large as the stone I had once received from Cole, and looking closely now, it was that very ring. Cole was his usual self. A neat suit, hair combed, a look that slipped past me like I was a stranger. Not embarrassed, not awkward, only a trace of tension when his eyes fell on Ethan beside me. Madison moved forward, gave Mother a quick hug and then turned to me with that familiar half-smile. "You look okay," she said, glancing at Ethan. "I was worried you might not come." I didn't answer. I only nodded slightly, my expression composed. "I heard you remarried?" Madison asked, tilting her head and brushing a hand through her hair, her look challenging. I turned to Ethan, my gaze softening. "This is Ethan," I introduced, my voice steady. "My husband." At that, Cole froze. I saw his hand tighten on Madison's shoulder. His face drained when Ethan looked straight at him. "Cole Anderson," Ethan said, his voice light as a breeze but not without an edge. "Long time." "Foster," Cole muttered, nodding slowly. "What a surprise." Ethan smiled faintly. "Not that much of a surprise. Boston's small. You still invest in data tech." Cole swallowed, trying to regain traction. I watched them both, quietly taking in the undercurrents in their gazes. I knew something Madison never did. Ethan was the man who had dealt Cole a devastating blow in a major deal 7 years earlier. Cole's company lost millions because of a bad partnership decision, while Ethan's success from that deal propelled him to the forefront of early-stage investing. Since then, their names had often appeared together in strategic analyses, like two uneven ends of a scale. Madison seemed to sense something. She stepped back half a pace, her gaze flicking from Cole to Ethan and back to me. "Well, you choose well," she said, forcing a smile. "A new husband and an old enemy." I said nothing. I merely placed my hand over Ethan's and squeezed gently. That small gesture reminded me I stood in the safe place of memory now, no longer inside the wound. Throughout the service, Madison sat 2 rows behind me. She didn't shed a tear, though her performance of mourning was well rehearsed. Cole stayed silent, occasionally casting looks toward Ethan as if to confirm he no longer held the upper hand. After the funeral, we returned to my parents' house. Ethan helped me carry the offerings into the kitchen. I was removing the white rose pinned to my dress when Madison came in. She closed the door softly, looked at me for a long moment and said in a low voice, "You're not mad at me anymore? Today you acted like none of it ever happened." I turned to her and met her eyes. "You're not important enough for me to keep it bottled up," I said. Madison gave a strained laugh. Still sharp as ever. I was silent, then turned away, leaving her standing in the kitchen with a smile that belonged to no one. When I returned to my room, Ethan sat on the bed staring out at the garden where my father had planted apple trees. He turned to me and said quietly, "I didn't expect we'd meet him again under these circumstances." I sat down beside him. "That's fine. Now everything's clear, nothing left to avoid." Ethan smiled and brushed my hair with his hand. "I'm proud of you. Not because you stayed silent, but because you know how to stand tall when others try to push you down." I rested my head on his shoulder, my eyes blurring as the leaves outside turned color. No matter how strong the winds, I had found a place where I could be at peace. And no one, not even the past, could take that from me again. A week after the funeral, my family's private lawyer, Mr. Harold Whitmore, sent a formal invitation for the 2 of us to meet at his office to announce the estate division. Mother wasn't present. She said she already knew the contents and wanted to spend quiet time at home with my father's memories. I didn't press. I know her well enough not to force her into facing what had already drained her. I arrived early, and as usual Ethan came with me, quietly like a part of me. We sat in a glossy walnut-paneled waiting room where portraits of Whitmore family lawyers lined the walls. The air smelled of old paper and a solemn quiet hung heavy. Madison arrived late. She entered with Cole close by, his hand draped over her arm as a way of asserting ownership. Even in a simple black outfit she carried an air of pride, as if the room were a stage where she expected recognition. "Hello," she said, nodding without warmth. I didn't answer. Ethan gave a soft greeting and turned back to the paperwork in his hands. The air between us stiffened for a moment, then relaxed when the secretary knocked. "Mr. Whitmore is ready to see you." We went into the conference room. Harold sat behind a walnut desk, his silver hair neatly combed, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. 2 cream-colored file folders, thick and sealed, sat before him. "First, my condolences to the family," he began, looking at me. "Richard was an honest man, principled, and he loved his children dearly." Madison pressed her lips together and nodded. Cole leaned back, hands clasped in front of him, a hint of impatience crossing his face. I remained silent, waiting. "He left an updated will 6 months ago, Mr. Harold continued, withdrawing a photocopy from the file. "Aside from modest bequests to close friends and charities he supported, the remainder of his estate is divided as follows." He paused, giving the room a moment to settle. "All management and ownership rights of the Wilson Family Legacy Trust, including real estate holdings, equity stakes in 3 investment firms, various securities portfolios and reserve savings, are granted in full to Ms. Ava Wilson. No conditions. The room fell into absolute silence. I heard Madison breathe sharply. Harold went on without letting anyone interrupt. Madison Wilson will receive an annual allowance from the trust, specifically $180,000 per year, subject to conditions. Madison sat bolt upright. Conditions? She demanded, her voice rising, losing its earlier hauteur. Harold turned a page. Clause 14. The allowance will be maintained only if Ms. Madison remains in a stable marriage, not divorced nor the subject party in any divorce action with Mr. Cole Anderson for a minimum period of 10 years from the effective date of this will. Madison jumped to her feet, almost shouting, "My father would never write something like that. This is a fake." Harold didn't flinch. "I personally drafted and recorded the reading of this will. There are witnesses, the family physician and Mr. Richard's financial advisor. You may have your own counsel verify its validity, but I affirm this is the official document." Cole was silent, but his face turned pale. I noticed a flicker of unease in him and suddenly understood that he hadn't known about this. Perhaps neither of them suspected my father would go so far. I said nothing. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. Inside I felt neither gloating nor pity. Just a strange, quiet calm, a feeling both warm and painful, as if my father were sitting somewhere, quietly righting the scales he had long seen tipped. After the announcement, I stayed behind to speak privately with Mr. Harold. When it was only the two of us, he pushed a small file toward me. "There are a few handwritten notes from Richard," he said, removing his glasses, his voice lowered. "Not official, just letters. He knew about what happened between you and Madison. He knew before you called off the engagement." I looked up. He'd been monitoring some of Cole's investments closely. When he saw a few irregularities, he hired someone to investigate. When he received the report, he said nothing. But he left a note. "I need to know people's hearts before I hand over the life's work I built." I took the papers and opened them. My father's familiar hand filled the page, steady as his character. In the notes, he described the feeling when he saw Madison and Cole leaving a small restaurant where he happened to drop by. He didn't confront them. He watched quietly and began collecting information. He didn't interfere or speak up. He stepped back to see how far they would go in their deceit. Then he quietly revised his will. At the end of the letter, in a slanted hand, was one line: "Ava is worthy to keep the light in this house. You know how to live kindly even when pushed to the brink of injustice. I believe in you." I sat in that room for a long time. Rain fell steadily outside, as if Boston were washing away years of falsehood. Inside me, something loosened. A grief that had weighed like a stone felt suddenly lighter, not because I had forgotten, but because I no longer had to force myself to hold it up. My father had seen everything and he chose the light. For me, that was enough. I didn't plan to see Madison after the estate meeting. Everything was painfully clear, and to me silence felt like the gentlest way to close wounds that could not be mended. But she came to me on a bitterly cold October afternoon while Mother and I were packing a few of Father's old things to donate. The door opened and Madison stood there, clutching my father's old wool coat that I'd left by the entryway. She no longer wore the usual proud bearing or the glam makeup she had once presented. Bare-faced, her eyes hollow from lack of sleep, she fidgeted with the frayed cuff of the sweater in her hands. "I just want to talk," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "Not about money. Not about the will. I'm tired." I didn't answer. Mother looked at me for guidance. I nodded slightly and stepped aside to let Madison Indiana. We sat in the kitchen. The kettle had boiled. I poured tea and the scent of ginger warmed the whole room. Madison was silent for a long while, occasionally lifting a hand to dab at the tears that began to fall from the corners of her eyes. Then suddenly she spoke, her voice tight but clear. "Cole controlled everything." I put my teacup down. I didn't interrupt, didn't react. Even my bank account, he changed the password without telling me. The phone I used was paid for by him. Every call and message could be monitored. I couldn't decide to buy a dress or book a flight without being questioned. Madison paused, glanced at me, then continued. The first 2 years I thought I was lucky. He loved me, spoiled me, took me everywhere. But then it changed. Slowly. At first he advised me not to keep in touch with friends. Then family. Then things like, "You're not good with numbers. Let me handle the paperwork." And I let him. I could hear in her voice no pleading or excuse. There was only an exhaustion, as if Madison finally understood she had trusted the wrong person. And the price was not only money but her own freedom. "I thought I had him figured out," Madison went on, her voice falling. "But actually, I was just a shadow." I took a deep breath and kept my reply steady. "Why didn't you speak up back then? Why didn't you tell Mom? Or Dad?" Madison gave a strained little smile, lifting one corner of her mouth. "Because I thought you would kick me out. I thought, if I stayed quiet, Dad would stand by me. I didn't expect he knew everything." I looked toward Mother, who was quietly wiping our father's old picture frame with a soft silk cloth. She said nothing, but her hand trembled slightly. The sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. The sorrow of a mother watching her two daughters be driven so far apart. "The Beacon Hill mansion was mortgaged twice," Madison continued. "The yacht he took me on for our wedding photos was rented. Everything was debt. Everything we had wasn't real." "What about the ring?" I asked. "Was it mine or rented too?" Madison gave a thin laugh and pulled a small box from her coat pocket. She opened it. The familiar diamond glittered under the kitchen light. "It's yours. I know he never bought a new one. Do you want to keep it?" I didn't answer. I simply looked at the stone, once the symbol of a betrayed love, now lying quietly in my sister's palm. It seemed smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I'd grown up, or maybe because what once dazzled now felt illusory. "Dad put that condition in the will," Madison said, "because he wanted me to be accountable. He wanted to know whether I chose Cole for love or for gain." "And what did you choose?" Madison looked up at me, exhaustion in her eyes. "I chose to live. Not with him, not relying on the allowance. I rented a small apartment in the southern part of the city. I'm applying for jobs at a marketing firm. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to tell the truth." The kitchen fell quiet. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, feeling the warmth of the teacup in my hands, jasmine and ginger mingling with old memories. "I don't hate you for loving Cole," I said slowly. "I can't forgive you for staying silent when you should have spoken. You didn't destroy my relationship. Cole did. But you helped. And the worst hurt isn't losing that man. It's losing faith in the person who used to sleep beside you at night and hold your hand when you ran across the street as a child." Madison bowed her head. Her shoulders trembled silently. I didn't comfort her. I no longer had the strength for soothing words. But I didn't push her away either. There are things that cannot be healed, yet still need to be laid down properly. Not for forgiveness necessarily, but because in the end we are still blood. And in every drop of that blood, mingled with pain and anger, is a piece of the Father who watched quietly and gave us one last chance to choose the right path. Madison left not long after, leaving the ring box on the table. I didn't open it again. I put it away in a drawer along with my father's handwritten letter. Ethan came home that evening. I told him everything, from Madison's looks to the confessions she'd made. "How do you feel?" he asked when I finished. I looked out the window as the streetlights began to come on in the late afternoon. "Not as angry as before," I said. "Not exactly pity either. Just a very light feeling. Like everything has finally settled into the place it should be." He took my hand and stayed silent. No need for more words. In that moment I knew I had passed half the longest journey, from resentment to release. Not because I'd softened, because I had grown strong enough not to hold on to what no longer belonged to me. I stepped into the main boardroom at Wilson Hart headquarters, my heart thudding like a drumbeat fueled by memories of betrayal. The room was more crowded than usual, not only major and minor shareholders but financial press, a few prominent media representatives, and most importantly the full board of directors, including Cole, who sat at the head of the table, the seat my father had occupied when he was alive. The overhead lights cast a cold glow over serious faces. Thick folders sat before each person. At the center, a large screen displayed the words, "Annual Shareholders Meeting, Wilson Hart, Proposal to Transfer Governance." A harmless-looking title, but I knew what lay beneath. Cole wore a gray suit and a half-smile. When he saw me enter, he tilted his head as if greeting me. "Ava, you're here," he said, his voice ringing in the quiet room. "We're about to begin. I suppose you'll want to sit beside your sister." I didn't respond. I pulled a chair opposite him and glanced at Madison, seated next to Cole, gaunt and pale, a shadow of herself. My eyes lingered on her long enough to catch a flicker of unease in the depths. The meeting's chair, Mr. Harrington, my father's former colleague, opened with a short speech. After a few words of thanks, he declared, "Today we will consider a proposal from Mr. Cole Anderson to add a board member in the capacity of husband to Mrs. Madison Wilson, the youngest daughter of the late Chairman Charles Wilson." A murmur rippled through the room. I did not move. I waited. Cole rose, his tone polished and rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, over the past year, Madison and I have not only been partners as spouses but strategic collaborators in the family's financial activities. I believe I have the capability and commitment to continue this legacy. As a family member, I propose to be added to the board of directors, replacing the chair's seat." A bold, ambitious strike. I heard many inhale sharply. I stood up, my voice calm and clear. "I have a document I want to present before anyone votes." I handed Mr. Harrington a red file. He opened it. His eyes sharpened as he read the heading. I turned to the entire board. "Before my father died, he signed a confidential agreement, legally notarized, that revised the inheritance provisions and the position of board chair. In it he specified that anyone who is not his direct descendant shall have no right of inheritance, whether by marriage or by proxy from a legal heir." I paused. "And more importantly, he chose me, Ava Wilson, as the sole successor, regardless of any internal disputes that might arise." A few board members sat up straight. Some reached for the files before them and flipped pages to verify validity. Madison drew in on herself, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Cole snorted a derisive laugh, but his eyes betrayed worry. "This document is notarized and stored in Wilson Hart's private legal system, signed by the family attorney and 2 witnesses," I continued. "My father anticipated manipulation and scheming after his death. He left this to protect the company from opportunists." Cole ground his teeth, but before he could react, a rear door opened. The person who entered sent a stir through the room, Ethan Hart. Ethan, my close friend and the grandson of the company's co-founder, had once headed the legal department but left the firm years ago over differences. No one expected him at such a critical moment. He stepped forward, nodded to me, then addressed the board. "I can confirm the authenticity of the document Ava has presented. I am one of 2 witnesses who signed the agreement, and I was entrusted by Charles Wilson to oversee this document in case Ava faced pressure from any family member." The room froze. I heard a few startled breaths. Cole managed a pale laugh, but his voice wavered. "You're not with the company anymore. Your confirmation carries no weight." Ethan turned, a wry smile on his face. "The document is stored in Wilson Hart's internal legal system, which I helped set up. More importantly, I hold the original copy, sealed and numbered by an independent law office." Cole started to argue, but Mr. Harrington cut him off. "We will verify this immediately." "Can you, Mr. Cole's proposal would violate our bylaws and must be rejected at once." Madison lowered her head and said nothing. I looked at her, trying to read the expression behind her watery eyes. Fear? Remorse? Or simply the shock of everything collapsing so quickly? I faced Cole, my voice low. "You used marriage to wedge yourself into my family and leverage the status of an insider to seize power. But my father never trusted you. And now the company will not trust you either." Cole's face flushed. He surged to his feet, clutching his folder. "You may think you've won. But I will." "You will step aside immediately," Ethan interrupted, not loudly but with unmistakable authority. "If you do not, I will release evidence showing you falsified collateral documents on Madison's behalf to secure personal loans, endangering the company's pension funds." I stayed silent, thinking Madison deserved a chance. "You don't." The room went deathly still. Some shareholders turned to one another, their dismay visible. Harrington spoke up. "I call for a vote of the board to reject Mr. Cole's proposal and bar him from participating in any executive activities in the future." "All in favor?" Hands went up all at once. No one objected. Cole stood stunned. I watched him walk out of the room without a word, without a backward glance. The meeting room lights remained cold, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I sat down, saying nothing more. Madison still sat there, her hands trembling for reasons I couldn't fully read. In any case, I had done what needed to be done. Not for revenge, but to protect my father's legacy. And to protect myself, someone who had been pushed out of the seat for far too long. Under the soft light of an October afternoon, I stood quietly in the small garden behind the new house. The maples had begun to turn a vivid red, signaling that autumn had truly arrived. In my hand was a letter, Madison's shaky handwriting, sent with an old photo of the two of us sitting together on the front steps when we were children. The photo was yellowed, but our smiles then were still sharp, as if time had never torn everything apart. I sat down on a wooden bench and smoothed the edge of the letter with my fingers. The last line stayed with me. I don't ask for forgiveness, I only ask for a chance to not disappoint you again. Madison had really left Cole. I learned that not long after the shareholder meeting, when the press began hunting her like a curiosity, when family turned their backs, investors withdrew, and her husband abandoned her once he realized she no longer had exploitable value. Cole left quietly, leaving behind a void filled with bitter words and the disappointed faces of those who had once lifted him up. And Madison, my sister who had once been spoiled to blindness, had truly ended up with nothing. I heard from my former assistant that she had to sell the wedding ring to pay part of the loan Cole had signed in her name. The glamorous photos that once flooded Madison's social accounts disappeared. In their place was a single image, a cracked ceramic mug, a hairline fracture running down its side like a vein, sitting on a bare desk in a short-term rental apartment. Then Madison came to me. Not through lawyers, not with the flowery language or the fake tears I'd seen before. She arrived on a winter morning, standing outside my office in a thin, worn coat, her eyes bewildered like a lost child. Can you spare a few minutes to hear me?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Ethan stood behind me, his face edged with worry. I looked to my husband and he gave a small nod as if he understood this was something I needed to face. I invited Madison into a small conference room where we'd held many quiet battles over the years. But today there were no files, no power plays. Just two women sitting across from each other, across a distance that had once been an abyss. "I'm not here to beg," Madison began, her voice hoarse. I just want you to know I lost everything. And in the night the only thing I remember is you. The only one who tried to pull me back from that whirlpool. I looked at my sister. Her face was noticeably thinner, her hands folded as if to hide their trembling. "So what do you want now?" I asked, gently but without coldness. "I want to start over. From scratch. Even if it's cleaning or making coffee, just give me a chance somewhere in the company or anywhere you think I can try. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't dare. But I asked to make it right." I was silent for a long time. Part of me wanted to close that door forever. The part that had watched her turn away during our father's memorial. The part that had signed away shares to block a financial assault on the company. But another part, the one that had held Madison when she fell off her bike at 8, that had given up favorite toys because she cried, still thought, if one day she truly recognizes her mistake, I won't turn my back. I took a deep breath. On the 6th floor of the main building there's a small guest apartment. It's empty. You can stay there. And if you really want to start over, the logistics department needs an assistant. No experience required, just punctuality and honesty. Madison choked back a response. "But you won't get special treatment. No one in the company will know who you are except HR. If you slip up, they can report you like any other employee. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears falling onto her hands. "Thank you. I don't ask for more." I nodded back, saying nothing more. Not because I had forgiven her, but because I needed to see change through actions, not through tears. A few weeks later I had no contact with Madison. But through internal reports I learned she arrived on time every day, ate lunch alone, never complained or asked for favors. The head of logistics, a blunt widowed woman in her 60s who'd made many young employees cry, left a short note in an email to me. "The new girl, Maddie, doesn't talk much but works steadily and owns her mistakes. Better than many I've trained. If she keeps this up, I'll consider promoting her to team lead when there's an opening. I read it and smiled, not sure why. My life slowly returned to a steady rhythm. Ethan was always the quiet support, never demanding that I forgive, but always willing to walk beside me through whatever decisions I made. And one Sunday afternoon, as sunlight poured through the kitchen window, he placed a hand on my belly and whispered, "We're about to have someone else to love." I smiled brightly into his chest, feeling a new heartbeat forming. Not revenge, not victory, but life. Truly. Some wounds never fully heal, but there are hands, patient and sincere, that can stitch them up with threads of hope. I don't know what the future holds for Madison. She may stumble again or she may stand firm. But I know I chose a path not only of punishment but of guidance. Not because she deserves the chance, but because I deserve to live in a world where justice and compassion can go hand in hand. And perhaps my father, wherever he is, would be pleased to see that the family he tried to preserve still has even a fragile opportunity to be whole again. What do you think of my choice? To neither exact vengeance nor fully forgive, but to give a fragile chance at reconciliation. Can a family torn apart by ambition and deceit find a little warmth again if someone is willing to stop and change? I don't believe every crack can be mended, but I believe in closing the chapter on suffering and opening a new path. For myself, for those who dare to face the truth, and for the new generation I'm about to welcome. If you've ever faced betrayal within your family, what would you do? Turn your back forever or leave a door ajar? Share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your stories and perspectives. And don't forget to follow the channel to continue walking with me through more emotional stories and meaningful lessons about family, justice, and the power of renewal after the rubble. Because maybe in every story we'll find a part of ourselves